Should I skip to the part where I'm giving this 5 stars?
I demand a single grace from you.
Hi, I'm Lady Genevieve, and on my channel I talk about entertainment media. Today I'm going to be reviewing Guillermo del Toro's Frankenstein, and wow, what an artist, what a visionary.
It's my favorite movie of all time.
Yeah, me too.
If you are new here, I should also add that not only do I do film reviews here on my channel, I also do source material videos. Now, I didn't make one for Frankenstein because of how late they were to announce a release date for it, and by then I was much further down my calendar of film adaptations and their release dates. The same thing happened to me with Hamnet, which I have read and talked about on Patreon, but there is no source material video of it posted on my channel. So I am going to mention the book a fair bit in discussing this film adaptation, and I'm going to issue a spoiler disclaimer for the book. But as far as the film, I think I'm going to make the first part of this review a some spoilers section, so that will involve some broad spoilers of the film, how it's reimagined this story, and I will be operating on a built-in assumption that you already have some awareness of the book that's been adapted and reimagined numerous times. The second part of this video will be anything goes, where I don't make any efforts whatsoever to conceal plot spoilers, so I will leave it to you to decide how far you would like to proceed. If you only want the broadest feedback possible, I will simply say that I loved this film. I highly recommend watching it. And that's that, preferably on the big screen. Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, or the Modern Prometheus, tells the story of our titular mad scientist of sorts. He's Swiss, by the way. If you've never read the book, you might have been operating under the assumption that he's English because Mary Shelley was English, but no, he's Swiss. He grows up obsessed with alchemy, but eventually transitions into studying the more modern sciences of the time period and decides to try to create new life. And he pieces together a body from various corpses to create an enormous 8-foot-tall creature, whom he is horrified by once he brings it to life. Whenever this creature encounters people, they react with fear, horror, and violence, and eventually he goes on an angry vengeance quest against his creator and more or less all of humankind. I had read Frankenstein before, but it had been many years since I last did so I knew that I wanted to reread it before watching this new adaptation, which I was looking forward to seeing specifically because it's a Guillermo del Toro film. There is no other director in Hollywood that is better suited to take on this story. That's everyone's favorite spooky ooky uncle. Of course he should do a Frankenstein movie. But actually, one of the things I found most unexpected about rereading Frankenstein is that I had also reread Emily Bronte's Wuthering Heights because I wanted to do a source material video on that. That video is already published here on my channel, and you're welcome to go watch that if you haven't already. I was very struck by how similar the creature and Heathcliff are, how many parallels are in their stories, at least in the books. We're not talking about the film adaptations just yet. Give me a moment. We'll get there. What do the creature and Heathcliff have in common? Men who are not born monsters, but are regarded by others as being a monster because of their outward appearance and the bigotry of mankind. They're treated with cruelty and hostility and violence, and this accumulates until they become monstrous. The trauma is too much for them to bear, and they go on these violent vengeance quests where they enact horrors upon multiple innocents who weren't even the ones to do them wrong in the first place, until finally they have nothing and no one left, and so ends their journeys on this mortal plane. I will spare you the many speculations about what that new version of yet another whitewashed Wuthering Heights is going to be, because we already talked about that in my source material video. But in shifting focus to Guillermo del Toro's Frankenstein, there are several changes made in adapting the source material into this film, but the changes are ones that make so much sense if you have watched many of Guillermo del Toro's films, if you are familiar with his pathos as an artist and storyteller. Now, if you are a book purist, or at the very least a purist about this book in particular, you might not be happy with this film, and I'm not going to nitpick your emotional response to it, but from my perspective, as someone that has been more closely studying the adaptation process by reading various source material books, doing videos of them for here on YouTube, or sometimes I just share my thoughts on those books on Patreon, and then I do the same in reviewing the film adaptations, I have now reached a point where I don't feel as strongly about adaptations needing to be done in one specific way. You can stay very true to the source material, you can take creative liberties with it, But ultimately, the adaptation and whether or not I think it's a compelling work of art is not going to be determined solely on how faithful it is to the source material. Guillermo del Toro's Frankenstein is an exceptional reimagining of the book, visually stunning, equally emotionally devastating as it is uplifting. It embodies every characteristic of his brilliance as an artist. It should go without saying, but it's a review, so of course I will say it. Visually, this film is immaculate. The costumes, locations, the sets, the props. This is a man who said he would rather die than use AI, and I adore him for that. The world feels so real and tangible. The only time the VFX were really obvious to me is when it was animals, and I was absolutely fine with that because I don't want to see real animals and be worried about if they're being stressed out by having to work on a movie set. I hate when I watch a movie and the VFX of the world itself, the world in its entirety, looks so artificial that I just can't buy into the story or the stakes. I don't have that problem with this movie, or any Guillermo del Toro movie for that matter. Speaking of visuals, let's talk about the creature design. When he first comes to life, I was a bit taken aback by the fact that he didn't really look scary to me. When I read the book, the way that the creature is described and the way that he's introduced, it was just a lot easier for me to imagine him as looking scary enough to just scare off anyone and everyone that beholds him. Now, I don't mind Guillermo del Toro's creature looking a bit less scary because the story holds a lot more empathy for him, and that's exactly what I would expect Guillermo del Toro to do. He loves monsters. Monsters are not the monsters in a Guillermo del Toro story. If you've been tuning in, if you've been paying attention, you would have already known that this is what he does. Actually, when they first introduced the creature in the film, you know what I thought of? Have any of you seen Ridley Scott's Prometheus? And as I already said, the full title of Mary Shelley's book is Frankenstein or the Modern Prometheus. The creature isn't the villain of the story. I can understand him being more humanoid than I imagined him to be when reading the book. The other detail to consider about his appearance, though, is that in the book, he's 8 feet tall, which is about 2.43 meters for anyone who needs that in metric. He's enormous. There's actually a shot earlier on in this film, in our introduction to the creature, once he's been brought to life, where he stands up and the camera is behind him at an angle, so you are able to see just how much he towers over Victor Frankenstein. And that was probably one of the most frightening shots I saw in the entire movie. Jacob Elordi is too short to be a book-accurate creature, but most actors, most human beings in general, are also too short in that regard, unless you do a Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings level of workarounds of making people appear to have extremely large height differences. I found it interesting how long it took to actually introduce the creature being created. I think it was about an hour into a 2.5-hour film before the creature is actually brought to life, but I think that's important to Guillermo del Toro's version because he needs to build this world, introduce these characters, and establish certain things so that you can understand the arcs and themes that span this entire story. I also like that they give Elizabeth more of her own mind in this film. In the book, her storyline is quite different. She exists to just be a love interest, a maternal caretaker. She doesn't get to partake in any of the drama that's more or less solely reserved for Victor Frankenstein and the creature. Well, actually, she does partake in the drama when the creature kills her. In the book, she's adopted by Victor's mother because she spotted her on the street with some peasants, and Elizabeth has lighter hair and fairer skin than the people and other children she's with. She's revealed to have been born from Italian nobility, and so she gets adopted by Victor's family, so she more or less gets raised as an adopted sibling of Victor's, but he calls her cousin, and their mother always wanted them to get married. English literature, European history, always with the cousin marrying. Marry someone that's basically your family member. In Wuthering Heights, Kathy Linton marries her first cousin, and then he dies because he's fragile. And then she marries another first cousin of hers. And to that I would like to say, why?
Take it away before I gag.
I'd like to get into more of the specifics now, so we're going to officially enter the anything goes portion of this video. I really liked the color design in this film. It enhanced the overall visual experience, and there's a clear intention to which colors are emphasized and when. I saw an interview clip of Guillermo del Toro talking about this, but one of the examples that he gave that I definitely noticed is that Victor's mother's color is red. When she dies during his youth, you repeatedly see that color still popping up afterwards, and it really seems to emphasize the way that the death of his mother is something that haunts him, this version of Victor Frankenstein is heavily shaped by the cruelty of his father and the death of his mother. That's why he's entirely ill-equipped to be a parent. That's why he immediately attaches himself to a woman who looks like his mother, because Mia Goth plays 2 roles in this film, Victor's mother and Lady Elizabeth. Maybe I should have said this in the less spoiler section, but if you're feeling some very raw wounds of parental trauma, just prepare yourself before you watch this. Corporal punishment is abuse. Thank you for coming to my TED Talk. Actually, while we're talking about Elizabeth, I could have sworn that I saw an interview clip in passing of Mia Goth saying that she was playing her scenes with the creature as coming from a sort of maternal energy, but upon actually seeing the film, girl, that was romantic tension, whether you meant it that way or not. You're going to tell me that I'm wrong? You taught him your name, which, okay, yes, you would teach a baby new words, but then you offered him your throat? I beg your finest pardon? When she offered her throat, I went, oh, it's going to be that type of movie for that type of audience. Got it, monster lovers, this one's for you. I was surprised that they didn't actually, you know.
Are you guys having sexual intercourse?
If you don't want it to come across like romantic tension, you needed to direct those actors to act differently, because I beg your finest pardon. And Victor was clearly jealous when the creature said Elizabeth's name. If he was like a baby, you wouldn't be jealous of a baby saying a new word, which is exactly what you had asked him to do. Although I will say, I really admired the change in this adaptation where you did get to see Victor and the creature spend a lot of time together after his creation, because in the book, as soon as the creature comes to life, Victor is so horrified by his appearance that he just runs away, and they are not actually reunited with one another until the creature is on his path of revenge and is murdering people that are in Victor's life. So this version is a lot more dramatic than that, and up close and personal. You get that emotional intimacy and makes the betrayal so much more deep. But Victor's whole weird obsession with Elizabeth, where he tries to act like he's in love with her, but he's not. He's just a toxic, traumatized man with parental issues. I really need to watch more interviews of Guillermo del Toro talking about that dynamic, because that was a very poignant call out of men who take rejection from women badly.
I got a gun. Help. That's the DMX. What you doing?
I can tell that this is the type of film that I'm going to want to keep rewatching and peeling back the layers on various subtext and commentary, because it's an intentional choice for Victor to have his research funded by a war profiteer and for him to build the creature out of the bodies of dead soldiers. Listen. Some of my favorite movies are James Cameron's Avatar films. Of course, I'm going to love a new movie with grandiose visuals and a story that sticks 2 middle fingers up at the war machine. Do you think I was saddened to see the death of Henrik Harlander? No! I bite my thumb at him and everyone like him. He wanted to transfer himself into the body Victor had created. Did we not all see Jordan Peele's Get Out? That is some supervillain behavior. Goodbye. And I have seen the nitpick online. I couldn't help it. I was logging my review on Letterboxd. I happened to see a couple of other opinions before I closed the tab. I saw the nitpick being made about some folks feeling as though it was too on the nose for Victor's brother to tell him straight to his face, "You are the monster." I think this is an opinion born from the cynicism, or perhaps from the genuine frustration towards corporations that are forcing storytellers to dumb stories down so that people can half watch while simultaneously being on their phone and still be able to follow what's going on. But respectfully, I disagree about it applying to this. I think that Victor Frankenstein, in this version, is a bull-headed fool trapped in an intergenerational cycle of violence that he cannot recognize because this is a period piece and he can't just go to therapy. So he needs someone to tell him to his face that his behavior is monstrous. What other opinion is he going to take seriously? Elizabeth told him exactly who he was from the very beginning, but did he ever listen to her at any other point? No. This is yet another reason why I like Guillermo del Toro's reimagining of this story. Elizabeth would rather die than be with the men she's being pushed towards. Her uncle was using her as a bargaining chip when he was trying to get Victor to let him get out himself into the body Victor had just made. Yuck.
Ugh.
Another detail I love about this version, which plays right into the thing where Guillermo del Toro loves monsters, we know this about him if you've paid attention at all, the creature is repeatedly being blamed and scapegoated for violence he did not even do. Yes, the film's opening is violent and he is enacting some of that violence, but insofar as the timeline of his story, that's near the end of the creature's journey that we follow in this film. Victor blames him for the death of Henrik. The blind man's family seemingly blames the creature for the violence that was actually done by the wild wolves. Victor blames the creature for the death of Elizabeth when Victor was the one to shoot her. I don't care that it was an accident. Not in the slightest. I feel like a different storyteller would have kept the darker ending. The book ends with Victor dying and the creature boarding the ship to look upon him for the last time and deciding to burn himself to death since he's not immune to death in the book, the way that this film's version of the creature is. But Guillermo del Toro is a sentimental man. He has a big heart. That's why his stories are so full of pathos. That's why he loves monsters the way that he does. And that's why his approach to the creature's story is so much more empathetic and emotionally driven in a way that is entirely unique to him as a storyteller. Victor and the creature having this sentimental heart-to-heart of kindness, forgiveness, of Victor finally bestowing the kindness he should have shown his son from the very beginning. Yes, I got emotional watching it. It was highly effective. I don't love every Guillermo del Toro film the same amount. I definitely favor some of them more than others, but the same can be said for all filmmakers that I hold in high regard, and Guillermo del Toro is definitely one of them. If you say written and directed by Guillermo del Toro, I will absolutely see it. It will be my number one reason to show up. And this take on Frankenstein is no different. The best part of this film is Guillermo del Toro. This film is the result of movie-making alchemy that is driven by Guillermo del Toro's artistic vision and approach to storytelling. I could hone in on so many details that I liked, but then I would never stop talking about this film. I love that he gave the creature so much more time to actually have a friendship with the blind man. In the book, they had one conversation. In this film, though, they get to spend a good amount of time together while the man's family is away. The head patting thing when he first approached the blind man and they had that initial conversation that made me want to curl into a ball and weep. Oh my God. And also, I really like that we didn't have to watch Victor tear apart his partially built female companion for the creature. What comes across one way in print comes across very differently in film. I did not want to see that, and we didn't have to see it. Victor just said no from the very beginning. Also, the dogs that Victor uses for transportation in the Arctic, they die in the book. In the film, they're fine. Guillermo del Toro is not someone who puts cruelty in for cruelty's sake, especially in this story. Anyway, my one final demand, maybe a complaint, I'm not sure. I need this released on physical media. I will be as annoying as I please about demanding this because I despise the direct-to-streaming model where companies don't release more or less all of their originals on physical media. If I'm able to, I would really like to watch this at least once more at the cinema, though it's extremely inconvenient to do so because it's not playing at my usual spot. I have to go elsewhere to see it, but I want to burn the impression of this film into my memory on the big screen. Guillermo del Toro does not make films on a small scale for you to watch on your horrible mobile phones. He's made a grand operatic tragedy infused with hope and heart, and I just want him to keep making monster movies. He's phenomenal at that. How is Doug Jones not in this? Not even a cameo? Was he busy?
Where is he right now?
Finally, I'm going to link an interview Guillermo del Toro did on a Korean show. It's about half an hour long. I watched it this morning after I had already outlined most of this review yesterday. So many of the things I was interested in learning more about were things that he actually ended up talking about in that interview. If you want to wait and watch the film first, you can always bookmark the interview and come back to it afterwards.